knitters, Clubkidknitter here. I wanted to include a video in the Hexagonal Knitting Series that covers a few things not discussed in any of the previous tutorials. Some of you may have noticed that with regard to increases, I've been using the M1T, or make one toward, both at the beginning and at the ending of a section. When I created the pattern for the Kaleidoscope Hexagons, however, I chose to do an M1B, or make one behind, at the end. My reasoning for doing this was to provide for a more symmetric appearance in between each of the sides. In essence, the M1B is the mirror image of the M1T. In this tutorial, I will be demonstrating Fair Isle knitting in the Continental method, in which both working yarns are held in the left hand. I will discuss and demonstrate proper yarn dominance technique when holding both yarns in the same hand. I'll demonstrate how to catch and trap floats using the same method as in two-handed knitting. This is sometimes referred to as weaving in or the weave-in method. Finally, I will demonstrate both the M1T and M1B stitch increases while holding both yarns in the Continental position. I know that's quite a bit, so to help you navigate to specific topics within this tutorial, check out the Timecodes section toward the bottom of the description. Jump to any topic within the video by simply clicking on the timestamp next to each topic. Yarn dominance is where you designate which of the two yarns will be the most prominent, either the main color, sometimes referred to as the background color, or the contrast color, sometimes referred to as the foreground or design color. Typically, you would want to designate the contrast or foreground color as the dominant one because you wish to highlight or emphasize the design. When knitting two-handed, this color is always placed in the left hand, and the main color is placed in the right. So how does this create yarn dominance? If you notice, the design color always sits below that of the main color, as clearly seen on the wrong side with regard to the floats. Since the dominant yarn is furthest from the top of the needle, each of those stitches are slightly longer than those of the main color which sits closer. As the former are longer, they are more prominent. The other most important aspect of this is that both colors must remain in an upper and lower position consistently throughout the entire knit. If you accidentally switch those positions during the project, you will notice a marked difference within your work. When holding both yarns in your left hand, the main color must be in the upper or right position, and the contrast color, or dominant color, must be in the lower or left position. And again, they must remain in those positions for the entirety of your knitting work. Tensioning two yarns in one hand can be tricky, especially when working with wool. I've tried a few different methods involving tensioning both yarns using the pinky, as well as different methods involving the index finger. You want to be able to literally tension the two yarns, but while also wanting each yarn to individually advance so that both remain in equal tension. The problem with using two yarns, and more specifically, two yarns when doing stranded color work, is that only one yarn at a time is being knitted, hence requiring advancement. It is important that the yarn not in use remain at proper tension for the duration. You don't want to end up with one yarn being tensioned while the other yarn goes slack. Out of the several methods I've attempted, this one works best for me, and hopefully it'll work for you as well. I always begin by grabbing my main color. With my left palm facing me, I catch it with my open pinky and then wrap it clockwise around it, and then extending it in between my middle and ring fingers. Again, my palm remains facing toward me. I let the remainder hang down the back of my hand while ensuring the position of the wrapped and draped main color rests in the uppermost part of those fingers, or closest to my knuckles. With my pinky finger, I extend it to grab my contrast color, the one which will be in the down position relative to the main color being in the up position. I then close my pinky and ring finger into my palm. Notice how the yarns now form a V in which the bottom is joined to your work. I now open my index and middle fingers, forming a V in which the bottom part points to the left. While slightly rotating my hand toward me, I insert my middle finger in between the two yarns, while at the same time inserting my index finger underneath the contrast color. I bring both yarns toward my knuckles. If you need to close some of the gap between your index finger and where the yarns join your work, do so by simply tugging on both yarn tails. You'll notice the ease at which you can do this, which should hint at the ease at which the yarn will advance as you are knitting along. Finally, position the main color yarn to the right of your first joint on your index finger, while leaving the contrast color yarn to the left. The two colors now form a V, and again, the bottom of it joins to your work. So let's do that again. Palm facing you, catch the main color with your pinky, and wrap it clockwise around it. extending it in between your middle and ring fingers, and then let it hang down the back of your hand. Make sure everything is close to your knuckles. Next, extend your pinky to grab the contrast color, again bringing it down towards your knuckles. Close your pinky and ring fingers, and then make a V with your index and middle fingers. And then insert your middle finger in between the yarns and your index finger under the contrast or bottom yarn by slightly rotating your hand inward. Finally, position the main color closer to the tip of your index finger and position the contrast color closer to the knuckles. That's it. I'll show you one more time. The yarns are now both properly tensioned, and you have established a dominant yarn. Again, remember that both of these yarns must stay in their position for the entirety of your knit. As the contrast color both rests and wraps closest to your knuckles, it should remain to the left of the first joint of your index finger as it feeds to knit your stitches. The main color should remain to the right of the first joint. You want to maintain a V at all times. If for some reason either of the two yarns end up touching one another or moving from their positions and are no longer in a V, simply readjust them. This shouldn't happen, however, if the contrast color remains closest to the knuckles. Also, through practice, this will get much easier. The great thing about this technique is that you shouldn't have to drop your yarns at any time. They can remain in your left hand at all times, including when you have to adjust your needles for magic loop. With any knitting, it is important that you are knitting properly, and this has to do with how you are picking each color. Once the knitted stitch is completed and transferred to the right needle, it is vital that the right leg of each stitch lays in front of the needle, and the left leg is behind. To achieve this, you must pick each stitch in the following way. Always approach the stitch to be knitted from above, and then swoop under from right to left. If you approach from underneath, from the left toward the right, you are in effect twisting the stitch. Here, I'll show you. As you can see, now the left leg is on top of the needle, and the right one is behind. On the next round, when you go to knit this stitch, it will end up twisted. It would be analogous to knitting through the back loop, which is typically not called for when doing stockinette stitch. So again, approach the stitch to be knitted from above, and then swoop down, under, from right to left. Trapping floats of the main color while knitting both strands continental. The trap method I am using is sometimes referred to as the weave-in method. In this round, I encountered two 4-stitch-in-a-row segments that are knitted in the contrast color, and will plan on trapping the float of the main color on stitch 4 for both. As a rule of thumb, I do not have floats longer than 3 stitches, meaning even if there is a 4-stitch run in a particular color, I would trap the float on stitch 2, 3, or 4. I mention that because I also stagger where I trap floats so as not to create a rut in any column. So, if in round 12 I trap the float on stitch 4, and then in round 13 I have to do another 4 stitches on top of the prior, I would then trap the float of the other color on stitch 3. I'm at the point where I will start the stitch run in the contrast color. Knit 1, knit 2, knit 3, and now on stitch 4, I need to trap the float of the main color. I insert the tip knitwise and bring it over both working yarns, swinging over both from left to right, and then swinging under both yarns from right to left. I'm basically just making one huge circle, encompassing both yarns. Next, pick the contrast color and bring it under the main color and out of the way, and then bring it through to completion. Now the float of the main color has been effectively trapped underneath the 4th knitted stitch of the contrast color. I'm going to knit the next few stitches to get to the next run of the contrast color stitches. Again, knit 1, knit 2, knit 3, and for stitch 4, I need to chop the float of the main color again. I insert the tip knitwise, and then bring it over both working yarns, swinging over both from left to right, and then swinging under both yarns from right to left. Next, pick the contrast color, and bring it under the main color and out of the way, and then bring it through to completion. I'm going to knit to the end of this section, and then we'll knit into the next section, so I may demonstrate this again. I'm at the start of another run of 4 stitches in the contrast color. Knit 1, knit 2, knit 3, and for stitch 4, I need to chop the float of the main color. I insert the tip knitwise, and then bring it over both working yarns, swinging over both from left to right, and then swing under both yarns from right to left. Pick the contrast color, and bring it under the main and out of the way, and then bring it through to complete the stitch. I'm going to knit the next few stitches to get to the next run of contrast stitches. Knit 1, knit 2, knit 3, and for stitch 4, I need to chop the float of the main color. I insert the tip knitwise, and then bring it over both working yarns, and then swinging under both from right to left. I pick the contrast color, and then bring it through to complete the stitch. Now I've come to a round in which I need to knit several main color stitches in a row and chop the float of the contrast color. I'll knit the first several stitches. Now I need to knit 5 stitches in a row of the main color. Using my 4-stitch rule, I could chop the float of the contrast color on stitch 2, 3, or 4. If I decided to chop my float on stitch 1, I would have to at least chop another float within that same run on stitch 5. But I'm going to keep things simple and plan on chopping the float on stitch 3, right in the center. Knit 1, knit 2, now we're chopping the float of the contrast color on stitch 3. Insert the needle knitwise, but this time go under both colors from the left and stop dead center. Lift the right tip up in between both colors, and then swing toward the right, going over the main and then down. Go from right to left under the main to pick it, and swing it under the contrast color and through to completion. Next, knit stitch 4 in the main. Now, if you notice how the contrast color is trying to sneak through to the stitch completion with the main, no problem. Take your left thumb and bring it down on top of the contrast strand to knock it back into place. You only want the main color to come through. Also, to adjust any tension within the float, simply flex your index finger in the up direction. And then knit stitch 5. I'm going to complete this section and then get into the beginning of the next section so I can show you again. I've knitted the first several stitches, and I'm at the start of the next 5-stitch run in the row of the main color. Again, I'll be chopping the float of the contrast color on stitch 3. Knit 1, knit 2, Now we're trapping the float of the contrast color on stitch 3. I insert the needle knitwise, again going under both colors from the left, and stop dead center. Lift the right tip up in between both colors, and then swing toward the right, going over the main and then down. Go from right to left under the main to pick it and swing it under the contrast color and through to completion. Knit stitch 4 in the main, again pulling the contrast color out of the way using your thumb, and then bring it through to completion, and knit stitch 5. I'll move into the next section so I can show you again. Knit 1, knit 2, now we're trapping the float on stitch 3. I insert the needle knitwise, again go under both colors from the left and stop dead center, lift the right tip up in between both colors, and then swing toward the right, going over the main and then down. Pick it and swing it under the contrast color and through to completion. Knit stitch 4 in the main, knit stitch 5 in the main. And that's it. You can see all the trapped floats for each color on the wrong side or the back of your work. I'm on a particular round in which I need to make 2 stitch increases. I will be making one at the beginning and one at the end. The idea is to make for a more symmetric corner or side that basically creates a mirror image on either side. Both stitch increases are on either side of a column of knit stitches. That's why the last stitch increase in each of the 6 sections is the second stitch from the last. The very last knitted stitch is the column of knitted stitches to which I just referred. The first stitch is going to be an M1T, or make one toward stitch increase. In effect, all we are doing is twisting a loop into the working yarn and placing it up onto the right needle. The loop counts as a full stitch in and of itself. We will not actually knit into this stitch until the subsequent round. This is what makes the M1T different from the M1R, or make one right. The twist in the loop is identical, except with the M1R, you're creating that loop with the bar that is between the 2 stitches from the prior round. You lift it up onto the needle while simultaneously knitting into it. With the M1T, that added part isn't actually done until the next round. What's the difference, or why the difference? Tension, that's all. The M1T creates a looser stitch increase, whereas the M1R creates a tighter stitch increase. As an FYI, the M1B, or make one behind stitch increase I will do at the end of this section, is similar to the M1L, or make one left, as described above for the M1R. Regardless, the two lean in the same direction, and both are mirror images of each other. When knitting Continental, one method is to use both tips as literal tools, where you will be creating and twisting a loop first onto the left tip, and then sliding it onto the right tip. This is a good method because you do not have to drop your already tensioned yarns that are in your left hand. You could drop the yarns and then use the thumb or index finger to twist the loop onto the right tip, but you would have to then go and retension both yarns in the left hand. We will be taking the loop of yarn and twisting it 180 degrees in the counterclockwise direction and then placing it onto the right needle. When we do the M1B, or make one behind, we will twist the loop in the opposite direction, or clockwise. Take the right tip of the needle and place it on top of the yarn you are wanting to make your stitch increase with. Again, make sure the tip points to the left. Press down on this same yarn with the tip, and then twist the tip of the right needle in the clockwise direction, and then under to lift it slightly. Place the leftmost portion of the lifted yarn in front of the left tip while using the right tip to finish wrapping it above and over the left tip, and then remove the right tip. The twist is now on the left tip. Next, take the right tip and insert it into the twist knitwise, and then slide it to the right needle, and that's the M1T or make one toward stitch increase. Notice two things. The first is that the working yarn that is departing the stitch or twist is exiting toward you, hence the name make one toward. Second, you'll notice that the same working yarn that is exiting toward you is doing so from inside, or from the interior of the needle, with respect to the other side of the stitch, which is on the leftmost edge toward the tip. Next, I'm going to knit across the section and stop when only one stitch remains on the left needle. Per my pattern, this last stitch needs to actually be knitted. However, before doing so, I need to make another stitch increase for this section or for this round, but this time in one that is the mirror image of the M1T, and that will be the M1B or make one behind. Now I need to make an M1B or make one behind stitch increase. This time, insert your right tip under the color you wish to make the stitch increase, and do so by aiming to the left. Make sure the left tip of the needle remains above or on top of this same yarn. Place your thumb on top of the yarn on the right tip, as this will help you in guiding the yarn up and over the left tip, and then sliding the right tip away from the twist you've just made. Next, insert the right tip purlwise into the twist that's on the left tip and slide it onto the right needle. And that's the make one behind. Notice how the working yarn is exiting from behind your work, and hence the name. Also notice this same segment of yarn is exiting from the interior or closest to your right finger. The loop must always conclude from the inside of the actual stitch increase. Next, I will knit the last stitch as normal. I'm going to adjust my loops to get into the next section, and I'll show you each stitch increase again. Take the right tip of the needle and place it on top of the yarn you are wanting to make your stitch increase with. Again, make sure the tip points to the left. Press down on this same yarn with the tip, and then twist the tip of the right needle in the clockwise direction, while using the right tip to finish wrapping it above and over the left tip, and then remove the right tip. The twist is now on the left tip. Next, take the right tip and insert it into the twist knitwise, and then slide it to the right needle, and again, that's the M1T or make one toward stitch increase. I'll knit across the section and stop when only one stitch remains on the left needle. Now for the M1B or make one behind stitch increase again. This time insert the right tip under the color you wish to make the stitch increase, and do so by aiming to the left. Make sure the left tip of the needle remains on top or above this same yarn. Place your thumb on top of the yarn on the right tip, as this will help you in guiding the yarn up and over the left tip. Next, insert the right tip purlwise into the twist that's on the left tip and slide it onto the right needle. And again, that's the make one behind. That's how you knit both working yarns Continental, rather than two-handed. You now know how to trap floats using the weave-in method, as well as how to do the M1T and M1B stitch increases. I hope you found this video helpful for your stranded color work, and more specifically this project. If you did, please give it a like, and please subscribe to see other tutorials, techniques, and tips. Thank you again for watching, and as always, happy knitting.